أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وله الحمد في الآخرة وهو الحكيم الخبير والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث إلى كافة الورى بشيرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته أئمة الهدى ومصابيح الدجى الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بعد فقد قال أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب اللهم صل
على محمد وآل محمد.
إن قوما عبدوا الله شكرا فتلك عبادة الأحرار. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Last night we were looking at the tradition I quoted a few moments ago, which is from none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu alayhi. And in this tradition the Imam points to the different motives people have for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he puts them in terms of levels. So he says that indeed there are a group of people who worship Allah out of desire, meaning they desire some reward. And then he goes on to say that this is the worship of tujjar and merchants, because they see it as a trade-off. In order to get something, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he goes on to say that then there is a group of people who worship Allah out of fear. Just like a slave would fear the punishment of his master, so too these are the abid, as he describes them. They are slaves because they are fearful of the punishment of not worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he goes on to mention, but then there is a group of people, and of course he himself is part of this group, who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shukran, out of gratitude. And then he says that this is the worship of the ahrar, those who are free, because they are free from all type of fear and all type of desire. They worship purely because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves our thanks. And in other traditions we see that the word ahlan is used, meaning that Allah is deserving of our worship, and hence this group worships Him. In another tradition as well, the word hubban is used, meaning that they worship Him out of love. So in any case, the great Imam puts people into these three groups in terms of their motives for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we went on to say that because these are the majalis of azan of the Holy Imam, we will be devoting these majalis to an examination of this tradition in some depth, and also an investigation into the whole concept of shukr in Islam. What does it mean? What are the implications of it? And so on and so forth. So last night we started our discussion by examining three questions. First of all, what do the Quran and traditions tell us about thanking others? Then we went on to ask the second question, and that was what are the implications of this for us in our lives when we see that in the Quran we are told that there are certain people who we need to thank more. So which people deserve our thanks more? And we look at that in terms of our biological parents and our spiritual parents. And then finally we asked ourselves, what are the health benefits of being grateful and thankful on a daily basis. We pointed to a number of studies and we showed that modern research emphasizes this as well, and it shows very clearly that there are lots and lots of benefits, both mental and physical, for somebody who exercises gratitude in their life on a daily basis. Tonight, inshallah, we will continue the discussion by examining the following 4 questions. And this is all very hot off the press, as they would say. I was looking at this just last night and today because there were a number of questions that arose over iftar and after iftar. So I decided to elaborate a bit more on this whole area. So hence, I have my trusted iPad in front of me tonight. The first question that we will look at is, if somebody worships Allah out of desire and out of fear, does that worship have any value or not? Because we said Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about these 3 groups, and then he says the highest group are those who worship Allah shukran or hubban or ahlan, like I explained. So what about the other 2 groups that in fact most people fall into? Do their worship does it have any value and worth or not? Is it only when we worship Allah shukran, hubban and ahlan that our worship has value? Secondly, does worshipping Allah out of fear and out of desire contradict the need for us to have an intention of qurbatan ilallah for acts of worship? So we are told that for acts of worship, they can only be valid if we have the intention of qurbatan ilallah, seeking proximity and nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we are worshipping Allah out of reward, out of fear of punishment, then doesn't that contradict our intention of qurbatan ilallah? We might be always saying it, I am reciting this, I am performing that, I am fasting, qurbatan ilallah. But if it is out of fear or it is out of reward, are we really doing it for proximity and nearness to Allah? Don't the 2 contradict each other or not? And then thirdly, how does the Quran use examples in the verses to talk about promises and threats in order to guide us? So in Arabic, we have the whole technique that we study in the Quran called wa'ad and wa'id. Wa'ad is a promise, wa'id is a threat. This is a technique that is used in the Quran to guide us. So let's have a look at some examples, because this also relates to the whole area of hope and fear. Wa'ad and wa'id. When you are threatening someone, obviously that is going to be some type of fear there. When you are promising someone something, obviously that's going to be some type of hope there. So what techniques does the Quran use, and what examples can we give where Allah talks about wa'ad and wa'id for guidance? And then fourthly and finally, which dua can we cite to show an amazing expression of an imam supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purely shukran, purely hubban and purely ahlan, not out of fear, not out of reward, but he is just supplicating to Allah out of thanks, out of the fact that he sees Allah as being worthy of his worship, and out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's begin our investigation of these 4 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the first question was, if somebody worships Allah out of fear or out of reward, then is their worship of any value? Like I mentioned, because Amir al-Mu'mineen describes those 3 groups, and that final group is very rare, then what about the vast majority of us? Doesn't our worship have any value or not? Well, the first thing that we need to bear in mind is that, remember, Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen does mention the word ibadah. for all three groups. So clearly, in His blessed words, all three groups are worshipping Allah. This is very important to bear in mind. He's not disparaging the other two groups as if they don't have any worth and any values. This was something that came up last night over iftar, and I thought, let me clarify it a bit more. It doesn't mean that if we worship Allah out of fear and out of reward, our worship has no value. No. What he's trying to say is that there are levels of worshippers. And at the lower level are those who worship Allah because of these reasons. But we should not stay at that level. Our ultimate aim is to gradually, step by step, rise higher and higher, so that we are shedding off all other types of motives for worshipping Allah, and we are left with one pure motive, which is shukran lillah. So most people, they start off worshipping Allah actually out of fear, out of reward. This is something that it is quite natural for us to even raise our children with. We often give them rewards. For example, before they become baligh, don't we try to get them into the habit of doing certain acts of worship? Like, for example, they're not baligh or baligha right now, but we will often encourage them to keep the fast, or even keep the fast as much as they can. Maybe not the whole one, but half the day, 3/4 of the day, however long they can. Then, if you can't keep it more than that, then break it. Have something to eat, have something to drink. And as a reward, we will give you, for example, we will take you to that theme park. We will buy you that model car or whatever it was that you wanted. We will give you some cash. This is something that is encouraged, sometimes on a community level as well. Same with salah. This is something very good. In fact, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have encouraged us to do this. That, for example, from the age of 7, and other ways that we are told that encourage your children, start them even before they become baligh or baligha, to encourage them, get them into the habit. So this is there even from our normal practices, and it is natural, it is a human thing to do, to encourage people using rewards and punishments, rewards and fear. So when we look at it from this perspective, we see that there is value in that worship, but we should not limit ourselves to staying there, but you should try and get higher and higher. Even in the Quran, when we look at the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we see that He Himself describes the mu'mineen as calling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear and out of some hope. So in Surah Sajda, verse number 16, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ. They vacate their beds in order to supplicate to their Lord. يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. They worship, they call Allah out of khawf and tama'an, which is hope, and وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. And they give out of what they have in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever we are providing them with, they give in the way of Allah. So what is this verse telling us? Well, Allah describes these people as believers. It's actually one of the signs of believers. So we shouldn't think that our worship doesn't have that value. It does, but we can always increase the value of our worship by trying to remove all attachments of hope and reward and getting to the station of ibadatul ahrar, the worship of those who are free of hope and fear. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now let's look at the second question, and that is, what about this whole idea of having qurbatan illallah for our worship? Doesn't ibadah out of hope and fear contradict us having an intention of qasdul qurba, as is known in Arabic. Qasdul qurba essentially means, literally translated, it means an intention of seeking proximity, nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But effectively what it means is that we say qurbatan ilallah, and it means obeying Allah humbly. Effectively, when we say qurbatan ilallah, sometimes it's difficult for us to relate to the concept of proximity to Allah. What do we mean, qurbatan ilallah? How can we, who are material beings, our material bodies, of course we have a spiritual element as well, but materially in this world, when we look at it, we find it difficult to relate to proximity to Allah, who is an immaterial being totally. So, a way of looking at this is simply looking at it in this way. Qurbatan ilallah, as the fuqaha have said, and I'll mention an example of a great faqih who describes this in his work. Qurbatan ilallah simply means the following: humbly obeying Allah. That's it. Humbly obeying Allah. So we can have this intention, and sometimes it's easier for us to relate when we are making the intention of having that in our minds, that I am performing this humbly, being humbly obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we look at it like that, it can inshallah help us in our ibadah. Now, looking at this, we see that in our traditions, there are many promises of rewards, and sometimes it tells us about some things that we will avert if we perform certain acts of worship. So for example, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, he talks about the rewards of namaz shab, salatul layl, the night prayer. Now he says that the one who performs the night prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him 3 rewards. One is that he will brighten his face. 2 is that he will freshen his breath. He will fragrant his breath. And thirdly, he will attract sustenance. Now, if I was to get up and perform Salatul Layl with this intention, that because it's mentioned by the 6th Holy Imam about these 3 words, and then I say qurbatan ilallah, isn't this a contradiction? That am I doing it for the rewards, or am I doing it to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Which one am I doing it for? And on the other hand, I know from a young age we've always been told that you cannot perform an act of worship and regard it as it being valid unless you have qasdul qurba, qurbatan ilallah. But then on the traditions we have all these other things. How about another example? Rasulullah Akram sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he says that give charity, for by giving charity you will cure the ones who are ill. Now, what do we do here? Are we giving charity, qurbatan ilallah, or are we giving charity to help those who are ill to get better? Or thirdly, what is sadaqah going to be used for? Well, sadaqah, we know, is used to help the poor. So now we have 3 things competing here. We have the intention of seeking proximity to Allah. Then we're giving charity to cure the ill. Then we are giving charity to help the pure. Which one is it? Is it all 3? Is it one? Are they contradicting? Which ones are forefront in our mind? Which ones are secondary? Which ones are later on in our minds? What happens here? Well, here we need to, inshallah, spend a few moments analyzing this, because of course it is something that we come across every day. Now let's have a look at this. Some of the great scholars like Ayatollah Al-Uthma Nasir Makarim Shirazi, when I was looking at his work just last night, may Allah protect him and all of our scholars, inshallah. He puts it like this. He says that actually, it is exactly worshipping Allah and seeking proximity to Allah when you have the intention of doing something for a reward or out of fear. He says it's exactly the proximity of Allah as well. They are not two different things, because it is a motive upon a motive. So you have a motive, for example, curing the sick. By giving sadaqah, this will inshallah cure that relative of mine who is ill. But qurbatan ilallah, this motive is a motive upon a motive. So it is enabling us to also get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember I said, closeness to Allah means humbly obeying Allah. So when we are doing this, who has given us the instruction in the first place? It's the sixth holy Imam, it's the Prophet, it's the Ahlul Bayt, it's the Quran. Where does all of this instruction ultimately come from? It comes from no other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who's told us that if you, for example, recite Salatul Layl, you'll have those three benefits of brightened faces, fragrant breath, and attracting sustenance. It is He who has ultimately guided Imam Sadiq alayhi salam to tell us, if you wake up for Salatul Layl, if you give sadaqah, it will have this type of benefit. If you wake up for Salatul Layl, it will have that type of benefit. So ultimately it is from Allah. So when we are doing it with these intentions, the fuqaha, the jurists themselves say, there's no problem. We can have the intention of fear or reward. Now, let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. When I had a look at one of the great works of Ayatollah al-Uzma Sayyid Ali Husseini as-Sistani, may Allah raise his station and the station of all the Maraji and all the scholars inshallah. I was looking at his work known as Minhajul Salihin. Minhajul Salihin is only available in Arabic. It is a 3-volume work, and it is his more detailed work on Islamic law. So we have his Islamic law translated into English, but this one is only available in Arabic. It is not really intended for, your average person. Mainly students and scholars will consult this work. Anyway, there he has a whole section on niyyah, on intention. And I'd like to quote what he says. In this work, he says that the intention one must have for acts of worship is an intention to perform an action in obedience and humility to Allah. Like I said earlier, humbly obeying Allah. That is what is meant by qasdul qurba, qurbatan ilallah. I am performing this act in humble obedience to you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then what is he going on to say? Perhaps he had in mind the statement of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu alayhi, because he alludes to those 3 ways of worshipping Allah. So he says it's sufficient if the reason behind the intention is the command of Allah. So it's sufficient if you do that act of worship because you know Allah has commanded it. Then he goes on to say, and it makes no difference if the motive for obeying the command of Allah is love for Allah, or hope of reward, or fear of punishment. Doesn't this allude to that tradition that we've been discussing over the last couple of nights? So what he's saying is that even if you have that intention of love for Allah, this is why you're doing the act of worship, or hope for reward, or fear of punishment, and this enables you to have that motive of obeying the command of Allah, and this is what is meant by qurbatan ilallah, then it's okay, your worship is fine. That type of intention is fine. So I thought I would spend a few moments clarifying that, inshallah, so that when we come across these traditions, we know exactly what is meant by our great Imam. Sallallahu Muhammad wa Muhammad. So now, even when we look at the Quran, we see that it is replete with references about worshipping Allah, about rewards that Allah offers, about the punishment that Allah will dish out if he is not worshipped. So the question arises then, why would the Quran, not just the Quran but also the traditions, even the du'as that we recite on nights such as tonight, we are constantly told that there are all of these rewards and punishments for what we are doing. If it was contradictory to us having such an intention of qurbatan ilallah, then the Quran will not just mention it once or twice, but it is replete with these references as to our du'as. So this is just another type of proof, if you like, as to the reason and the fact that there is no contradiction between the two. In fact, like I said earlier, it is Allah Himself who encourages us to do this, because it is something quite natural, like we do with our children. We encourage them to gradually develop a habit of doing something. Inshallah, that will not just become a habit, but it will become something they do out of love, something they really want to do. They miss doing it if they don't do it. Gradually, this is a way of doing our tarbiyat, and we shall Allah get to the station of ibadatul ahra. So now let's have a look at that third question, and that is, what examples are given in the Quran of the technique of wa'd and wa'id, the technique that Allah uses to promise and to threaten, promise and to threaten. He does this all the time. Let's have a look at some of these examples, and then we'll see how Allah is doing our tarbiyah when we recite the verses of the Quran. Now, as I mentioned a few nights ago, there are a set of verses in the Quran known as Ayatu Ibadi Rahman, the verses of the servants of Ar-Rahman, the all-compassionate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are verses 63 to 76 of chapter 25, Surah Al-Furqan. And in these verses, Allah puts forward about 14 qualities of His sincere, pure servants. So we looked at one of those qualities a few nights ago. One of them is that they do think about the punishment, and they do pray to be kept away from the punishment of hell. This is one of the qualities of the Ibadur Rahman. So therefore, it should also be one of our qualities. In the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in verse number 65 of Surah Al-Furqan says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. They say that, oh our Lord, keep away from us, turn away from us the punishment of hell. Indeed, the punishment of hell is very enduring, it is lasting, it is gharama. So what this is telling us is that Allah Himself is describing in the Quran that one of the qualities of the great, sincere, pure servants of His is that they pray to be kept away from the punishment of hell. So this is one example of wa'id. Wa'id is a threat. So it's a technique that He uses. And then inshallah, I'll say a few words about what implications this has for us as parents, for us as adults, when we want to guide others, especially our children. Should we be using wa'ad or wa'id? More or less of threat or reward? Inshallah, I'll come to that in a few moments' time. But to give us an idea of this, just to prepare some groundwork before we move on to that, our fifth holy Imam, Imam Mohammed al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salam alayhi, he describes it in a very beautiful way. He says that the true believer has in his heart two lights. This is really important for us to bear in mind, especially when we are doing the upbringing of our children. We are training them. We are trying to do their tarbiyah. He says the true believer has in his heart two lights. A light of hope and the light of fear. And then he says that if this one were to be weighed, it would not exceed that one. And if that one would be weighed, it would not exceed that one. So what he's trying to say is that it's as if you have a scale, our balancing scale, if you like, of where we must be with regards to this whole concept of hope and fear. We must always have it in balance. Hope on the one hand, fear on the other hand. Hope of Allah's rewards, hope of Allah's mercy, hope of Allah's forgiveness. Like tonight, inshallah, when we call out to Allah in the a'mal we do, we should always have this hope that, okay, we have been sinful. We have not been the true abd that we should have been. But we have hope in your mercy, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for your maghfirah, for your rahmah, and for even your reward that I can inshallah attain it in this world and in the world hereafter. But the Imam says he also has, on the other hand, that fear. That fear that if I am not living up to my duties as an abd of Allah, then definitely I'll be punished as well. Definitely His azab will come on to me, either in this world or in the akhirah, or perhaps both. And therefore the Imam illustrates it in this very beautiful way, that the true mu'min has in his heart two lights. It's amazing how he describes both as lights. The light of hope and the light of fear. If one was to be weighed, it would not exceed the other, meaning they should be at a balance. So what implications does this have now for the way we bring up our children? Sometimes people say we are using too much of wa'id, too much of the threat, of the fear. Why don't we talk more about the wa'ad and the promise and the mercy? Well, this gives us a very good indication that we should talk about both. We should strike an even balance of both when we raise our children. Because this is what, and inshallah I'll point to another verse in the Quran as well. Not just what the Imams have taught us, but Allah has taught us in the Quran as well. If we do this, then we will raise our children with a balanced approach. They will grow up to be, inshallah, balanced human beings in their character and in their spirituality. One thing I would mention though, is that everyone is different. These are some general guidelines, but we know some children will be more receptive to promises. Others will be more receptive when they are threatened. It's the way they are. And we must use our common sense. We must use our experience, get guidance from others, our grandparents perhaps, and try to get that balance right. It's going to be sometimes a little bit more of one than the other. But generally speaking, we should try and get that balance right and try to get them as evenly mixed as possible, inshallah. So now, of course, like we've been saying all along in the analysis of this tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam, that we must, we can have ibadah of abid and of tujjar, of the servants and of traders, but we must eventually get to the ibadah of the ahrar, the free. They are free of all hope, of all reward, and of all fear. This is illustrated beautifully as well in Surah Tawbah, verse number 72. Look how Allah uses the technique of wa'ad and wa'id. He says, and also how it links with this tradition of Mawla Amir. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. Allah does wa'ad. So we look at wa'id with regard to Ibadur Rahman. Keep me away from the punishment of hell. Now let's look at wa'ad. So this verse is saying that the mu'min, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises the believing men and the believing women. He promises them with what? Jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. He promises them with gardens under which these rivers will flow. Khalidina fiha. they will remain in them forever. وَمَسَاكِينَ طَيِّبًا, and really beautiful and good dwellings. فِي جَنَّاتِ عَدَنٍ, in gardens of Eden. Now, so what is this? This is obviously, if somebody was to worship Allah from this perspective, would it be the ibadah of the tujjar, the abid, or the ahrar? It is obviously of the tujjar, the merchants, because it's a wa'ad. They are worshipping Allah for those gardens under which rivers are flowing, and those masakin tayyiba, those brilliant dwellings, khalidina fiha, they will remain in there forever. But then, what did we say? That nobody should stay at that level. If they are able to rise to a higher level, they should certainly try and do that, to reach the level of Amirul Mu'mineen. This now is told to us in the remainder of the verse. What does Allah say? It doesn't stop there. This is a lesson for us all. It's okay to have that level of ibadah, but that's not the ultimate aim. The ultimate aim is وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرٌ. The Ridwan of Allah is greater than all of that. Meaning the pleasure of Allah. The ridayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is akbar. ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. That is the supreme success. So this is exactly what Amirul Mu'mineen has been telling us. That don't stay at that level, because there's always a higher level that people like him were at. The Ridwan of Allah is akbar, it is greater. This is what we must try to, inshallah, try and achieve. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In fact, it is so interesting to note that even when Allah describes His own book, no, not just His own book, even when He describes His most beloved of creation, Rasulul Akram sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He describes them using the same terminology. You must have heard of Bashir and Nadir, or Mubashir and Nadir. It means something or someone who gives glad tidings, that's the Bashir or Mubashir. And the Nadir is the one who is a warner. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use this whole concept of hope and fear, wa'ad and wa'id, to not just do our tarbiyah in the Quran like we saw, but also to describe His own book and His beloved Prophet? Well, it is remarkable that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these words to describe His book and His beloved Prophet. So, for example, in Surah Fussilat, verses 1 to 4, Hamim Tanzilun min ar-Rahmanir Rahim. That this is a book, it has been gradually being revealed from Rahman Rahim, the All-Merciful, the Ever-Compassionate. Kitabun Fussilat Ayatuh, Qur'anan Arabiyyan liqawmin ya'lamun. It is an Arabic book that has been elaborated for people who know. Then what? Verse number 4. Bashiran wa nadhiran. فَأَعْرَضَ أَكْثَرُهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ. It is a book that gives glad tidings, and it is a book that warns people, wa'ad and wa'id. Just like we are encouraged to always have these two in our hearts and to do the tarbiyah of our children, this is the technique of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah Himself uses this technique. That's the Quran. How about the Holy Prophet himself? How does he describe him? Well, when he talks about his mission, he uses the same words. In Surah Ahzab, verses 45 and 46. Ya ayyuhan nabi, inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira. O Prophet, we have sent you as what? As a witness and as a Mubashir, someone who gives glad tidings, and somebody who warns others. وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ وَسِرَاجًا مُنِيرًا. And a caller to people by His permission, and a very radiant lantern. So, when we put all of this together, what is the conclusion we get? The conclusion we get is that Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he talks in this wonderful tradition about the levels of worshippers, and he says that their motives differ, it all depends on our intention. What we are being told here by both Amir al-Mu'mineen and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is that this is a brilliant way of us to do our tarbiyah, both of ourselves as individuals and of others. We must always have the hope of Allah's reward and mercy and maghfirah on the one hand, and on the other hand, we must always fear His punishment if we are disobedient to Him. We must do this with our children as well, and with others. We must try and get the balance right depending on their personality. It is the way Allah has described His book and His own Prophet, because this is how the Quran does our tarbiyah, and how the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt do our tarbiyah as well. Sallallahu Muhammad wa Muhammad. Finally, before we mention a few words of Messiah, let's answer that fourth and final question, and that was, what example can we cite from the Imams themselves of an expression of pure, sincere devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for Allah Himself? The ibadatul ahrar. Let's have an example now. We've spoken so much about ibadatul ahrar. Can we have an example of a imam totally devoted to Allah in his dua, not because of any reward, but because of who Allah is Himself? This example I'd like to quote from this wonderful work, which inshallah I'll try to mention a bit more about, and that is As-Sahifatul Sajjadiyah. I really feel it is a book that we have neglected as a community. Not, one person here or there or this particular community, but generally speaking, the community has neglected this work, unfortunately. I'll mention some other words about this, inshallah, in the nights to come. But just to give you an example of how beautiful this work is. In this dua, Imam Sayyidul Sajideen, Zainul Abideen, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, he supplicates in this dua, in one of the 15 whispered du'as, the munajat. So there are these 15 munajat at the end of this work. It's available on duas.org, inshallah, mu'mineen. If you get a chance, especially tonight, to have a look at it, at this work, please do. It is brilliantly translated by William Chittick, and the one that's online and readily available has the additional benefit of also incorporating with it Risalatul Huquq, the Treatise of Rights. So you have two works in one file, if you like, in one work. And of course there were two separate works, Risalatul Huquq and Sahifatul Sajjadiyah. They are two separate works altogether of the Imam, but they are conveniently placed together in this readily available work, which is translated by William Chittick. In any case, towards the end of that, there are these 15 whispered prayers, the munajat. They are wonderful. And what I would recommend everybody does is look at the titles of these du'as and the munajat and the other supplications, and use them. Use them for our daily problems, our daily issues. You'll see there are du'as for all sorts of issues. Look at the titles, see what things that are going on in our lives, and read that du'a. And you'll see how much it helps us with that particular issue that we are facing. So this one is known as the whispered prayer of the devotees, the Munajatul Murideen. It is whispered prayer number 8. Look at the worship of the Ahrar, the free people. فَأَنْتَ لَا غَيْرُكَ مُرَادِي. He says, "Oh Allah, you are my object, none other. وَلَكَ لَا لِسِوَاكَ سَهَرِي وَسُهَادِي. To you alone belongs my waking and my sleeplessness." He has no other intention apart from Allah. Then he goes on to say, وَلِكَاؤُكَ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي Meeting you is the gladness of my eye. That's all I want. I don't want any reward or anything. It's meeting you. وَوَصْلُكَ مُنَى نَفْسِي. And joining you is the wish of my soul. وَإِلَيْكَ شَوْقِي. My yearning and my longing is only to you. وَفِي مَحَبَّتِكَ وَلَهِي. And in love for thee, my passionate longing. وَإِلَى هَوَاكَ سَبَابَتِي. In inclining towards you is my fervent craving. I'm only craving for you, nothing else. وَرِضَاكَ بُغْيَتِي. Your pleasure is the aim I seek. وَرِضْوَانٌ مِنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. Remember, the Ridwan of Allah is greater. وَرُؤْيَتُكَ حَاجَتِي. The vision of you is my need. وَجِوَارُكَ طَلَبَتِي. Your neighborhood is my request. Just being near you, that's my request. That's all the request I have. And then finally, we spoke a lot about qurbatan ilallah. Look at the final line. وَقُرْبُكَ غَايَةُ سُؤْلِي. Nearness to you is the utmost object of my asking. For me, that is what I long for. Not any reward, not any punishment that I am fearful of, but simply qurba to you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as a summary tonight, we looked at this whole area of shukr with respect to this tradition from Amir al-Mu'mineen, and we asked ourselves these 4 questions that with regards to the whole concept of worshipping Allah sincerely, what about the worship of those who are doing out of fear and reward? We said yes, that is valuable, but the ultimate aim is to get to that station where we are worshipping Allah purely shukran, hubban and aklan. Then we saw that there is no contradiction between qurbatan ilallah and having the intention to attain these rewards or have these punishments averted from us. Then we looked at the whole concept of wa'ad and wa'id in the Quran. Allah uses this to do our tarbiyah. We should also use it to do the tarbiyah of ourselves and others. He describes the Quran as Nadhir and Bashir and His Holy Prophet as Nadhir and Bashir. We too therefore must also be Nadhir and Bashir for ourselves and others by having a balanced approach both for us and others of hope and of fear. And finally, we saw the supreme example of the Imam reciting to Allah purely for him, not for anything else. Sallallahu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Sallallahu alayka ya Sayyid al-Wasiyyin. Sallallahu alayka ya Imam al-Muttaqeen. We know that Mawla Amir had this great affinity for orphans. In fact, in one of the traditions, we are told that just before his martyrdom, he writes a will. And in that will, he gives a number of pieces of advice. One of them is the following. He says that Allah, fil aitam. By Allah, pay attention to orphans. In another tradition, we are told that Ana al-Hadi wa Ana al-Muqtadi. I am the guide and I am the one who has been guided. Wa Ana Abul Yatama wal Masakin. And I am the father of orphans and the destitute. Amir al-Mu'mineen had this great love for orphans. But this then became reciprocated on the night of his martyrdom. For the orphans, they loved him so much that because they heard that milk would be good for Amir al-Mu'mineen to drink in his illness, they came to him with their milk in the hope that Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen would drink their milk and get better. Despite not having hardly anything, despite just waiting for people to help them. They would even wish to give their milk away just so that they could help their father, Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is the station of Mawla Amir. We are told that in the tradition that Asbaq ibn Nubata, he comes to Mawla Amir and he doesn't want to leave his house. He hears that all the people are crying. Him and his companions, they are outside. They are also crying when they hear that the family of the Ahlul Bayt are crying for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam Hassan alayhi salam comes outside and he says to him, "Oh Asbaq, just go now. You and everyone else, you must leave." Asbaq, he stays behind. Imam Hassan notices that he is there still. He says to him, "Didn't I tell you, oh Asbaq, to leave?" He says that, "Oh, how can I leave? I will not go until I see Imam Ali." So Imam Hassan goes inside. He has a word with his father. He comes back out and he says to him, "Okay, Asbaq, come inside." Asbaq goes inside and then he reports what he sees. He says that when I looked at Amir al-Mu'mineen, his face had become so yellow because of all the blood that had been drained from his body. And he says that he had a cloth tied around his head which was yellow in color. But he says that I don't know which one was more yellow. Was it the face of Imam Ali, or was it that yellow cloth that was tied around his head? At that point he starts crying. Imam Ali now tells him, "Oh Asbaq, stop crying, for I am going to paradise." Asbaq says, "Yes, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I know you are going to paradise, but I am crying because I will be separated from you." This is the effect Amir al-Mu'mineen had on people, on orphans, on his family members, on his companions. Inshallah, let's take this example and live the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That people, they weep for us in this way when we leave this world. Now Amir al-Mu'mineen, he gives this advice to Lady Zainab. He says that, "Oh Zainab, it is as if I see that afterwards you will be taken captive, as will the children and the women of your family, and you will be on the streets of Kufa and Sham. But I say, O Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen, how true your words were, for this is exactly what happened to Lady Zainab and the family of the Ahlul Bayt after Karbala. For they were paraded in the streets of Kufa and Sham." In fact, Sahal ibn Sa'ad, he's one of the companions of the Prophet. He reports the following. He says that when I went to Sham, I saw that there were all these people rejoicing there. And when I found out why they are rejoicing, I learned that they are rejoicing because the head of Imam Hussein is being brought from Karbala to Sham as a present. He says the streets were decorated. But then when I looked at where the people were coming from, I saw that they are riding horses, they have flags, they are rejoicing. There are all these soldiers coming one after the other. But afterwards, I saw that there are a group of people following them. I looked towards them and I saw that there are these spears held up high. On one of the spears there's a head, and that head resembled the face of the Messenger of Allah. So now Sahal ibn Sa'ad, he says, I went over, and we can imagine he must have seen the children being chained, the women being pushed, there were others who were being hit. He goes up to one of the young children, he says, "Oh my daughter, what is your name?" And she says, "I am Sakina." And now Sa'ad says to her, "Oh Sakina, is there anything I can do for you? For I am Sahal ibn Sa'ad. I was a companion of your grandfather, and I narrated traditions from him." Sakina tells him, "Yes, Sahal, there is something you can do. Tell that person who's carrying that head to go away from us, so that the people become busy in looking at that head, and they don't look at us, for we are the family of the Messenger of Allah."
But mu'mineen, I say that, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, oh Imam Ali, if only you had described what happened afterwards as well to the sacred head of your son, Imam Hussein. For they didn't stop there. It was taken to the court of Yazid. Over there they brought it on a gold basin. They placed it in front of Yazid. He was having a party where alcohol was being served. When he saw the face in front of him, he began to drink wine in front of it. And then he did something despicable that only someone as depraved as him could do. He took his stick and he started hitting the teeth of Abu Abdullah's head.
We ask you by the right of Amir al-Mu'mineen that you protect and hasten the appearance of our Imam. Oh Allah, bring relief to all those in difficult situations. Oh Allah, forgive us and our forefathers for our sins. Oh Allah, decree for us on this night that which is best for our dunya and our akhirah. Oh Allah, enable all those who are in all different situations around the world to always come out of their difficulties in the best possible way. Oh Allah, enable us to worship you at the highest possible level, the level of ibadatul ahrar. And oh Allah, enable us to always live and die with the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen.